At the height of his power, a single decision by one man could quietly bankrupt entire nations without firing a shot. No armies marched, no borders moved, no declarations were made. Yet factories closed, food prices doubled, savings evaporated, and governments fell. The man sat behind polished wood, speaking in measured sentences about stability and confidence, while millions felt the consequences weeks later. The twist is this: the most destructive wars of the modern era were not fought with weapons, but with currencies, and most people never learned about them because they don't look like wars at all. Currency wars don't leave craters. They leave unemployment lines, they don't produce monuments, they produce debt, and they rarely end with surrender. They end with inflation, austerity, resentment, and a rewriting of history that pretends the conflict never happened. To understand the currency wars you were never taught in school, you have to abandon the idea that money is neutral. Money is power. Whoever controls its value controls trade, labor, and political survival. And throughout history, states have repeatedly used currencies as weapons, sometimes deliberately, sometimes desperately, and sometimes while insisting they were doing the exact opposite. The story begins long before central banks, before fiat money, before exchange rates flashed across screens. It begins with a simple realization. If you can control what people use to pay taxes, buy food, and store savings, you don't need to conquer them militarily. You can dominate them economically. The earliest currency wars emerged alongside empires. When ancient powers expanded, they imposed their coins on conquered territories. Taxes had to be paid in imperial currency. Soldiers were paid in it. Local money was pushed aside. This wasn't convenience, it was control. By forcing populations to acquire imperial currency, empires ensured dependence on their systems of trade and extraction. Rome perfected this strategy. As Roman coinage spread, local economies became tied to Rome's fiscal health. When Rome debased its currency to fund wars and bureaucracy, inflation rippled outward. Provinces suffered price shocks they had no say in creating. This was an early form of monetary domination, and it planted a pattern that would repeat for centuries. The center exports instability to the periphery. But currency wars became far more lethal with the rise of global trade and paper money. By the 17th and 18th centuries, European powers were locked in competition not just for territory, but for trade surpluses. Mercantilism ruled economic thinking. Wealth was measured in gold and silver reserves. Exports were good, imports were bad, and currencies were tools to tilt the balance. States manipulated coin content, controlled exchange rates, and restricted capital flows. If your currency was undervalued, your exports were cheaper, your industry stronger, and your rivals weaker. This logic would later be refined, denied, and repeated endlessly. But the first truly global currency war erupted in the 19th century, and it didn't look like one at the time. Britain, powered by the Industrial Revolution, sat at the center of global finance. The pound sterling was backed by gold and trusted worldwide. British banks financed trade across continents. The British Navy protected shipping lanes. On paper, this was stability. In reality, it was asymmetric power. Countries that tied themselves to the gold standard effectively outsourced monetary policy to Britain. If gold flowed out of a country, its money supply contracted. Interest rates rose. Recessions followed. Britain, as the financial hub, absorbed shocks better than anyone else. When crises hit peripheral economies, the solution was always the same: austerity, cut spending, raise rates, protect the currency at all costs. Social pain was treated as collateral damage. This wasn't called a currency war, it was called discipline. The problem was that discipline was not evenly applied. Britain could run deficits, others couldn't. Britain could suspend gold convertibility in emergencies, others paid the price. This imbalance came to a head after World War I. The war shattered economies, destroyed gold reserves, and left governments drowning in debt. Yet, instead of rethinking the system, policymakers tried to resurrect the pre-war gold standard. They believed stability meant returning to sound money, regardless of changed realities. The result was catastrophic. Countries pegged their currencies to gold at unrealistic levels. To defend these pegs, they raised interest rates and slashed spending. Deflation set in, unemployment soared. Economies contracted. Britain abandoned gold in 1931. The United States followed in 1933, But not everyone moved together, and that's when the currency war truly exploded. As some countries devalued their currencies to regain competitiveness, others refused, fearing loss of credibility. Those that devalued first gained export advantages. Those that clung to old pegs suffered deeper depressions. This was the first modern currency war, competitive devaluation. No one declared it, everyone denied it, but each move forced responses. If one country weakened its currency, others felt pressure to follow or be crushed by cheaper imports. The world fractured into currency blocks. Trade collapsed. Protectionism surged. Political extremism fed on economic misery. The Great Depression wasn't just a failure of markets, it was a failure of monetary coordination. And it taught a dangerous lesson. When survival is at stake, countries will sacrifice cooperation for advantage. World War II ended not just with military victory, but with a new monetary order designed to prevent another currency war. The Bretton Woods system pegged currencies to the US dollar and the dollar to gold. The United States emerged as the anchor. Its economy was intact, its gold reserves immense, its political influence unmatched. For a time, it worked. Trade expanded, growth accelerated, currency stability returned. But beneath the surface, a new imbalance formed. The world needed dollars to trade. The US had to supply them. That meant running deficits. Over time, more dollars circulated than could be backed by gold. Confidence wavered. By the late 1960s, foreign governments began demanding gold in exchange for dollars. US reserves drained. The system cracked. In 1971, the US ended gold convertibility. Just like that, the world shifted to pure fiat money. Exchange rates floated. Bretton Woods died. This was not framed as a currency war. It was framed as necessity. But the consequences were global. The dollar weakened. Inflation surged worldwide. Countries scrambled to adapt. And for the first time, currency value became an explicit policy tool. From this moment on, currency wars entered a new phase: covert normalization. Instead of open devaluations, central banks used interest rates, capital controls, and later quantitative easing. The language changed. The strategy didn't. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and a new front opened: emerging markets. Countries in Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe wanted growth. They needed foreign capital. To attract it, they pegged currencies to the dollar and borrowed heavily in foreign currencies. This worked until it didn't. When capital flowed in, economies boomed. When it flowed out, currencies collapsed. Debt burdens exploded. Crises followed. Mexico in 1994, Asia in 1997, Russia in 1998, Argentina in 2001. Each crisis followed the same script: capital inflows, inflated bubbles, pegged currencies, masked risk. Then sentiment shifted, investors fled, currencies crashed, living standards fell overnight. Were these currency wars? Not officially, but consider the incentives. Advanced economies controlled global liquidity. Their interest rate decisions determined capital flows when they tightened policy. Money rushed home, leaving devastation behind. Emerging markets paid for policies they didn't control. The pattern repeated again after 2008. The global financial crisis began in the US, but the response reshaped the world. Central banks slashed rates to zero and printed trillions. This was called stimulus, stability, recovery. But from the outside, it looked like something else. Massive monetary expansion weakened currencies. Capital flooded into emerging markets seeking yield. Asset bubbles formed. Exchange rates soared. Then came the reversal. As advanced economies hinted at tightening, capital fled again. Currencies collapsed. Debt burdens surged. Countries that had followed the rules suffered anyway. This wasn't accidental. It was systemic. Currency wars in the modern era are fought through balance sheets, not battlefields. Through signaling, not speeches. Through policy divergence, not declarations. China entered this story with a different strategy. Instead of free-floating, China managed its currency tightly. It accumulated massive foreign reserves. It intervened to keep exports competitive. Critics accused it of manipulation. China denied it. But the results were undeniable. By controlling its currency, China protected domestic industries and fueled export-led growth. The US complained, Europe complained. But no coordinated response emerged, because everyone was doing some version of the same thing. Japan kept rates near zero for decades. Europe followed, the US oscillated. Each move affected exchange rates. Each shift created winners and losers. The term currency war resurfaced in 2010 when Brazil's finance minister openly declared one was underway. He wasn't wrong, but nothing stopped it. Because currency wars are politically convenient. They allow governments to stimulate economies without overt protectionism. They shift pain outward. They provide plausible deniability, and they always hit ordinary people hardest. When currencies weaken, imports become expensive. Inflation rises, wages lag, savings erode. Meanwhile, exporters benefit, asset owners often benefit. Inequality widens. This is why currency wars are rarely taught clearly. They blur responsibility. They complicate narratives. They challenge the idea that markets are fair and neutral, yet the patterns are clear. Strong currencies become weapons. Weak currencies become shields. Policy coordination breaks down under pressure. And global stability becomes fragile. Today, the battlefield is even more complex. Digital currencies, sanctions, payment systems, reserve status. Cutting a country off from the global financial system is now a form of warfare. Freezing reserves is a monetary strike. Blocking settlement networks is economic siege. These are currency wars by other means, and the stakes are rising. Trust in fiat systems is thinning. Debt levels are historic. Political polarization is high. Economic shocks are frequent. Alternatives are emerging not from ideology, but necessity. History suggests this ends one of two ways: coordination or fragmentation. Either systems adapt cooperatively or blocks harden, currencies splinter, and conflicts intensify. Three takeaways matter most. First, currency wars are not anomalies. They are the default behavior of states under stress. Second, monetary power is never neutral. It always reflects political priorities. Third, the costs of currency wars are social, not abstract. They show up in jobs, prices, and stability. The warning is uncomfortable. The next major conflict may not start with soldiers or sanctions, but with spreadsheets and statements. The open-ended question is this: in a world where money itself is a weapon, who is really winning and who is paying the price? If this deep dive changed how you see global economics and the hidden battles shaping your everyday life, consider subscribing for more explorations into history, power, and the systems no one explains in school. Because the wars that matter most are often the ones you're never told are happening.